The great cantonment city of Nasirabad was laid out by Ochterlony. He could have called it Ochterlonypur, but he decided to call it Nasirabad based off of his Mughal title of Nasirud Dawla, defender of the state, that he got from Emperor Shah Alam. In Nasirabad, Bishop Heber met Demetrius Athanaeus, a Greek shopkeeper. His brother was a shopkeeper in Meerut, and they planned to return to Greece after retirement. Unfortunately, he died a few months after he met the bishop and is buried here in Nasirabad Cemetery. And the British buried in this overgrown, forgotten graveyard these men and women, make no mistake, were economic migrants too, coming to a rich land to make their fortune, hoping to find their way out of poverty. India is today again a destination for economic migrants from the West. As I think about Demetrius Athanaeus, I think about all the economic migrants who cannot return to their homeland. Bishop Heber had heard all kinds of bad things about Nasirabad, but he found that it was a pleasanter place than he had expected. The cantonment, in particular, was regular and convenient, the streets of noble width, and sufficient vegetation that saves the view from the utter nakedness which is usually seen in Rajputana. This beautiful church was built after the bishop's visit. When he came, the spiritual facilities here were meager. Furniture was also in short supply, so everybody brought their chairs. Much to my surprise, even today, inside the church, there is no permanent furniture. They have a few plastic chairs lined up. Bishop Heber describes Bhinai as a good-sized town with a little old castle on an adjoining rock. There were a good many spreading trees around the base of the castle, which was a very unusual ornament in this part of the country. The people of this place begged the bishop to not deface the trees by cutting them for their elephants and camels. Bishop Heber agreed and purchased 300 little bundles of maize straw as food for the elephants. Walking through the town in the evening, Bishop Heber came across two very elegant little temples. Right away I see this somewhat opulent Jain temple. This may have been one of the temples that Bishop Heber saw. But next to the Jain temple, there is a temple that has clearly seen better days and has to be one of the temples that Bishop Heber mentions. The Raja or Thakur of the place resided in the fort and was a child at the time, so did not call on the bishop. In Ajmer fort at the museum, I had seen a painting of Raja Jagat Singh of Bhinai. I wonder if this was the child who was ruling Bhinai at the time. Completely off the tourist map and with many buildings that look like they may have looked 200 years ago, with dogs sleeping on their doors. Bhinai reminds me a little bit of what Rajasthan used to look like when I was growing up. On the outskirts of the town, I find some of the truly most amazing rural landscapes that I come across on my travel. Now a large and prosperous city known for its textile industry, Bhilwara was completely and utterly devastated and totally depopulated in 1818 because of Pindari raids. The area was resettled by James Todd, who obtained tax exemptions from the Rana of Udaipur, gave the people articles that they could copy and manufacture, and personally spent a lot of money in beautifying the place. When Bishop visited, everyone sang praises of James Todd. A merchant told him that this place should be renamed Todganj, but there really wasn't a need because they were never ever going to forget his name. Today, James Todd is completely and utterly forgotten in Bhilwara. Of course, James Todd is famous today as the writer of the Annals and Antiquities of Rajasthan. Although criticized for exaggerating the splendors of Rajasthan and exaggerating the valor of the Rajputs, his tome remains a valuable source of reference even today. Truth is, much of the annals and antiquities of Rajasthan was just compilation of stories that Colonel Todd got from his Jain guru that you can see in these paintings. The impressive thing to me is that he was able to accomplish all this in just 5 years, from 1818 to 1823, when he was a political agent of the East India Company to the states in Rajputana. He left his position ostensibly due to declining health, but more than likely it was because of his friction with Ochterlony. He is also credited for coining the name Rajasthan, which the entire province takes today. Today, this whole area is extremely industrialized, with smokestacks and clusters rising like arms of God as India seeks to industrialize. But that wasn't always the case. The road after Bhilwara was through a country chiefly covered with open jungle to Hamirgarh. A little before Hamirgarh, Bishop Heber passed the river Banas, a dry channel with the exception of a narrow stream of beautiful and rapid water in its center. In the rainy season, it is a very great river, he was told, and they had never seen it so dry before. Today, this is a river that's been decimated by sand mining. Hamirgarh was a little town where Bishop Heber saw all the marks of prosperity and a considerable manufacture of chintz going on. As I walk through the alleys of this small town, I see a lot of tailor shops. I wonder, are they still making chintz? On an adjacent hill stood the castle of a rebellious Thakur who had rebelled against the Rana of Udaipur just a year prior. But the most important landmark in Hamirgarh, in the center of the town, were three very pretty temples ranged in a line built on a uniform plan. Founded by a rich local merchant. Hemmed in by a cute little vegetable market and hard to photograph, the scale of these temples and their magnificent symmetry becomes obvious when I climb the neighborhood roof. I also get to see these cute little gargoyles. I'm gonna see them again at Chittorgarh Fort. Like Bhinai, Hamirgarh also has a special something that seems to be vanishing rapidly in Rajasthan. Something special, like this pink door and a dog in a shelf. This bridge over the Gambhiri River in Chittorgarh dates at least back to 1303. When Bishop Heber visited, this was in ruins and he had to ford the river somewhere near here. Today it has been reconstructed and is still carrying traffic. Only in India can something so spectacularly old and beautiful be completely ignored. But the bridge is ignored for good reason. Not too far stands the fort of Chittorgarh, in a state that is full of forts, magnificent ones. This is easily the granddaddy of all the forts. The approach to Chittorgarh Fort is by a zigzag road, Bishop Heber says, of very easy slope but stony and in bad repair, passing under 6 gateways with traverses and rude outworks. We then arrive at the main gateway of Chittorgarh Fort, which is of course Rampole. The astute bishop notices that the gateway is lofty and striking, with a good deal of carving in the genuine style of ancient Hindu architecture with no Mussalman intermixture. I notice a lot of the carvings are just simply dissolving in the sun, laid out in the open. But there are still many more which are absolutely spectacular. And from out here, we get a good view of Chittorgarh city itself. On entering the Chittorgarh fort, Bishop Heber passed through a succession of most extraordinary and interesting buildings, chiefly ruinous, but some still in good repair. There were 2 or 3 little old palaces, remarkable for the profusion of carvings. But what was most interesting to Bishop Heber, and is interesting to any visitor today, are all the stories that are associated with these palaces. including the stories of Jawhar, where it is said many thousands of women immolated themselves rather than being taken by invaders. Bishop Heber shows some degree of reluctance in believing these stories, which were widely believed by the locals in these parts. There are also many gorgeous temples, including this one, a little bit like the temple I saw in Hamirgarh. But this temple has a very odd notice at the entrance. But the most extraordinary building in Chittor is the minaret dedicated to Shiva, Vijayastam.
Vijayastam dates back to 1448. Bishop Heber was impressed enough by this monument to make a sketch. He was also able to climb to the top. Disappointingly, like most of the Indian monuments, access to the monument itself is now blocked off. You cannot even get close to it.
Bishop Heber describes the Vijayastam as a square tower 9 stories high of white marble, most elaborately carved, surmounted by a cupola with the 2 highest stories projecting balcony wise beyond those beneath them. He says there is a steep and narrow but safe staircase of marble within, conducting to 7 small and 2 large apartments, all richly and delicately carved with mythological figures, of which the most conspicuous and most frequently repeated are Shiva embracing Parvati and Shiva in his character of destroyer with a monstrous cobra in each hand. I have to satisfy myself by looking at the carvings on the outside using the zoom feature. Mind blowing as they are, I really miss being able to go inside the tower, where on the 5th floor is carved the name of the architect, Sutradhar Jeta, and his 3 sons who assisted him, Napa, Puja, and Poma. This is one of those rare places where the name of a humble architect can actually be seen carved onto the building. Walking up the stairs by a virtual menagerie, a large number of very aggressive looking monkeys, cows, dogs. I come to the Kalika Mata Mandir, the largest temple in the fort, dedicated to the destroying powers of Kali. Bishop Heber notices a large peepal tree grew in the court of the temple. Today, a little husk of that tree remains. He also notices the trident of Shiva in the front. Today, there are 2 tridents, for good measure. But it is only when I come to the side of the temple, away from all the Instagramming crowds and all the flowers and decorations, that I truly see the spectacular carvings on the temple. I notice, just like Bishop Heber did, the admirable masonry and judicious construction of this temple, as of everything else in different parts of the fort. To my surprise, I see many chicken in here, for which I don't see any reason for, but luckily for me, I do not see any signs of animal sacrifice. Bishop Heber did not either, but he saw that the pavement was stained with the blood of sacrifice from one end to the other. Neemuch cantonment dates back to 1817 to the Pindari campaign. Out here in this small, obscure town in central India, Sir David Ochterlony built a great house which was in good repair when Bishop Heber visited. Bishop Heber says that Ochterlony himself never stayed in this house. It is said that local Bhils offered flowers at this house for many years after Ochterlony's death. For a short while in 1857, this great house was occupied by rebels. Such was the awe of Ochterlony that this house was not harmed in the revolt, even as the remainder of Neemuch cantonment was burnt to the ground. Today, this house is very much in use as the officers' mess of the Central Reserve Police Force, which has its headquarters in this small town and traces its origin to the Crown's representative police constituted in 1939 to protect British residents in sensitive areas. On February 27, 1825, in the drawing room of Sir David Ochterlony's house in Neemuch, Bishop Heber preached to a congregation of nearly 100. He had 8 communicants, and to his very pleasant surprise, 4 applicants for confirmation. Bishop Heber saw the construction of a fort in Neemuch, started by Ochterlony, which I cannot visit. The British were very worried about Indian troops in Neemuch joining the revolt in 1857. We have the voice of Muhammad Ali Beg, an Indian soldier, asking his officers, "Why should we keep our oaths to you who have broken your own? Have you not taken Awadh?" The sepoys from Neemuch made off with a treasure of almost 2 lakh rupees. They travelled to Tonk and Agra and eventually to Delhi, where they saw a lot of action in middle of July.
I'm right outside the old British graveyard in Neemuch. Somewhere to my left is buried Roderick Ochterlony, the half Indian son of David Ochterlony. The Ochterlony line of baronets is descended through him, through his son Charles Metcalfe Ochterlony.
That Roderick Ochterlony obtained a baronetcy itself was a miracle, a tribute to the respect for David Ochterlony and his years of labored negotiations with the Heraldry Society in England. It saved his descendants, who, even though they were uncommonly fair, were condemned to a lifetime of ill treatment as half castes without the baronetcy.
It's a little too late for me to be going inside a graveyard, because there might be ghosts. Also buried in here is the daughter-in-law and grandson of Robert Burns, the national poet of Scotland, the man who wrote the words to Auld Lang Syne.
Robert Burns was a prodigious womanizer and had at least 12 known children from 4 different women. His last child was born on the same day that he died.
The ruler of Pratapgarh, Samant Singh, was actually quite an accomplished person, even though the bishop seems to have a very low opinion of him. He had become a feudatory of the British in 1804 to escape from the constant harassment of the Holkars. The British immediately set upon interfering in every little aspect of his kingdom. His chosen heir apparent was Deep Singh. The British decided he was unworthy and exiled him. He tried to come back, but he was re exiled and eventually died away from Pratapgarh. Bishop Heber documents that Samant Singh was broken-hearted because of his love for his unworthy son. Bishop Heber notes that Pratapgarh was famous for two things. It had a mint, at least since the times of Shah Alam, and there was Thewa art.
The intricate art form of Thewa, characterized by delicate gold designs fused onto colored glass, remains a testament to Pratapgarh's rich cultural heritage. This art form originated during the reign of Savant Singh by the artisan Nathulal Soni and is preserved by the same family that originated it. I met some of the hospitable family members in Pratapgarh.
The one thing the British did much better than Indians do now is statuary. Most small towns I go through have statues of Mahatma Gandhi or other leaders. They generally seem paltry and small, like the statue of Mahatma Gandhi standing under a mushroom.
The country around here is pretty, says Bishop Heber, with a mixture of wood and arable land by no means disagreeable. The hills are low but very rocky, the valleys and level ground of a rich and deep though light black loam. The villagers, however, were among the poorest he had seen. The night before, Bishop Heber had noticed a hard frost, where the temperature falls below minus 2 degrees centigrade or minus 28 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 4 hours. That had resulted in severe damage to the poppies, which the natives of this part depended on primarily to pay their rents. I find an independent record corroborating this hard frost that occurred on February 28, 1825. The fact that it occurred towards the end of February or early March tells me how much climate has changed in India. These hard frosts are now increasingly rare, and this time of the year can be very hot. In these parts, Bishop Heber watched the people celebrate the festival of Holi. They were very noisy all day and for a great part of the night in merriment. On the great day of Holi, all of Bishop Heber's Hindu servants came to pay their compliments and bring presents of red powder and sugar plums. The event was rather costly to the bishop, as he was obliged to make presents in return because it was dastur, or the unwritten and common law of the land.
Crisscrossed by tiny streams, this entire area is still heavily forested. The main inhabitants here are tribals called Bhils, and the bishop and the British both show their traditional interest in tribals. The traditional alcoholic drink around these parts is obtained by fermenting the flower of the mahua tree. Bishop saw a large amount of mahua flowers being transported. The British eventually banned it, citing religious reasons, but the primary motivation was revenue. They wanted a liquor monopoly. Interestingly, the British had no compunction about encouraging the use of opium. Opium was widely grown in these parts as well. In Banswara, Bishop Heber met the young Raval Bhavani Singh. He was 21 at the time, plainly dressed with a voluminous red turban, gold anklets, and a handsome sword. Bhavani Singh seems like a very curious man because he asked the bishop what happened to all the opium that was grown here. And to some extent, opium explains the interest that the British had in these small states in Malwa. Opium had been traditionally grown here for centuries, but by 1820s, enough of quantity was being smuggled out of here to make a dent in British profits from Bengal opium. British tried to establish a monopoly between 1821 to 1830. That eventually failed, and they started letting Indian traders and others export Malwa opium from Bombay. That led to the establishment of the great Parsi houses that we know of.
Bishop Heber seems very surprised to find a large and handsome palace in Banswara, of a place of which all he knew was about its poverty and a custom for female infanticide. I have to be satisfied to look at the palace from the outside. I cannot get in. The most interesting part of the visit was what the bishop heard in the marketplace, and it speaks to the keen interest of the British in affairs of all minor states. The bishop heard the people were not happy that the Raval was not married at 21, and they did not like his minister, the Jain. Both these issues foreshadow what happened later. By the 1830s, the British made the Raval dismiss his minister for arrears in tribute and for debauchery. Shortly thereafter, the Raval passed away, childless. Somewhere around here, by the cistern of water, Bishop Heber took his abode in a little old palace. With an advantageous view of the city and the palace, he noticed the trees were finer and the view more luxuriant than anything that he had seen since leaving Bharatpur. Prosperity is trickling down to these villages in the heartland of India, still mostly populated by Bhil tribals. Bishop Heber made a sketch of a Bhil hut at the time. Now, the road is mostly lined by large white buildings. A romantic road through a wood containing many fine trees and displaying a reasonable show of verdure brought Bishop Heber to a small but well-built village named Kalinjara. In Kalinjara, Bishop Heber saw what he called dismal-looking house of the local Thakur. It has seen better days, but the door is spectacular. And as I walk through the little town of Kalinjara, I see many other spectacular doors. My walk also brings me across this little stone altar, perhaps the simplest and most profoundly beautiful temple I see in my entire journey. Probably dating back to the 1570s, this temple was completely abandoned at the time when Bishop Heber visited, probably because of all the raids of the Marathas and the Pindaris who had decimated business in this area. Entering through this porch, Bishop Heber was able to explore the temple at leisure. Being completely abandoned, his only companions in the exploration were bats. I enter through a large hallway and gate next door, where I see these large statues of Jain monks and large posters. I make my way to what is clearly older construction. With a strangely whitewashed dome, the pillars still retain a lot of their original beauty. This is a working temple. There are people praying and prasad being laid out in little plates. It's hard to reconcile this temple to what Bishop Heber must have seen and his very detailed description. A lot of it has probably been significantly altered, but much of the temple retains its original character with alcoves and little shrines, and in the center, a large pyramidal structure with a big shrine. Bishop Heber describes finding frescoes of strange Persian looking men in this temple. The frescoes, for sure, are all gone. A long march through a thick forest, only interrupted by a few patches of corn and Beale hamlets, brought Bishop Heber to the banks of the river Anas. The river was mostly dry then, but today I see a lot of kids frolicking and splashing in the water.
So much of India's geography is ancient. Bishop crossed over from Rajputana into Gujarat right around here at Chittorgarh. Even today, the border between Rajasthan and Gujarat is very near here.
His tents were pitched on one of these hills, and Bishop Heber calls it the wildest and most romantic encampment he had seen since he left Kumaon.
The struggle of the indigenous people of India against British colonialism has only been partially documented. The bishop talks about a battle that took place near here at Chittorgarh a few years prior to his visit, where Bheels, armed with primitive bows and arrows, fought against the British army. The Bheels fought with primitive bows and arrows, but they must have fought bravely because they inflicted quite a bit of casualties on the British.
Periodic battles, usually very one-sided affairs, really massacres of Bheels, continued in this area for decades until independence. Even today, the record of the modern Indian state in tribal areas is mixed, as is witnessed by this broken bridge.